Welcome to everyone streaming and watching, and thank you to Cindy McCain and the McCain Institute for hosting this event on the defense of democracy in the digital age. I'm Margaret Brennan, moderator of Face the Nation and senior foreign affairs correspondent at CBS News. I've had the privilege of interviewing both of our next guests a number of times, and I'm sure you'll all enjoy the conversation today with Chris Krebs, who is well known to all of you as the former director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and currently the co-founder of Krebs Stamos Group. Will Hurd, as you all know, served as Republican representative for Texas's 23rd Congressional District until his retirement this year. And before that, he was a CIA clandestine officer. So welcome. Congressman,
pleasure to be with y'all.
I want to start with you. And I know you're out of office, so you can answer everything straight on the nose, completely honestly now. And
well, that implies I didn't in the past, right? No, I've always, come on, I've always shot you straight. I've always shot you straight.
You have. But I want to ask you, it was out of Texas, a Texas-based company called SolarWinds that made that software update available to its customers last spring, apparently provided this entry point for one of the largest hackings in US history. Now we have the Biden administration officially attributing it to Russian intelligence, the SVR. They've promised to upgrade US systems. From where you sit, is the prime threat to our democracy coming from an external force or internal?
Ooh, a great question. I think if you asking that question to me right now, I would say it's almost equally important, or the threat is equally internal. This is the politicians and I would say certain elements of the media as well that is continuing and pushing misinformation and disinformation, which is causing this erosion of trust, right? But also that is being fueled by our adversaries. Why are the Russians doing what they're ultimately doing? They are trying to erode trust at every level of our at our society. So if we're more worried about fighting over whether you should wear a mask or not, and that means we're not talking about them amassing troops, the Russians amassing troops on Ukraine's border, right? If we're questioning the efficacy of NATO, then we're not working with NATO and putting our plans in place to defend, a potential NATO ally from the Russians. So these two things are compatible. If it's a Venn diagram, there's some overlap, and they're both equally important. And it starts with good digital hygiene, making sure we're defending digital infrastructures from people being able to steal our stuff. But it also comes to building trust. And the only way you can build trust, I don't know of any tool that can build trust. It requires civil society, academia, the media, elected officials to engage with the public and be honest and tell the truth.
Why is that so hard?
Why is that so hard? So I would say from an electoral perspective, right? If you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? From an electoral perspective, when you look at the last election in 2020, 92% of the seats were decided in a primary, right? There was literally there was 34 seats that were split ticket from the previous election. And when I say split ticket, obviously meaning people voted for one party president, the other party for Congress. 3 Republicans in Hillary Clinton seats, 31 Democrats and Donald Trump seats. And so when the majority of your elections are decided in a primary, and contested primaries see anywhere between 24 and 50,000 people voting, you're talking to a very small percentage of the population, and sometimes that's the extremes. And so this over-reliance of people talking to that extremist edge of their electorate, whether it's Republican or Democrat, which is causing some of that problems.
Chris Krebs, we just learned also just a few weeks ago about another external hacking, the threat, the Microsoft Exchange hacking. It's believed to have Chinese fingerprints, although at this point it seems like there are fingerprints from a lot of different actors all over this thing. Is the prime threat external, or is the prime threat toward democracy internal?
I think, like Will described, we have to be able to hold multiple threat actors in our minds at any given time. And back at CISA, we developed a motto, a saying that was "Defend today, secure tomorrow." And really, what was behind that is, as you're operating in the current environment, defending networks, pushing back against disinformation, you also have to be thinking 6 months down the road, a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road. And I think that's what's so challenging about today's risk environment is yes, we have this constant assault and erosion of confidence in democracy domestically, where you see state legislatures enacting laws to restrict voting in many cases, purely based on a lie, purely based on this lie of a stolen election in 2020. If it were not for those claims, I mean, I can guarantee that if President Trump had won re-election, you wouldn't be seeing these same sorts of legislation rolling out at the state level. But at the same time, like Will said, many of these claims are being promoted and further abused by foreign actors. So some of the anti-vax and the vaccine hesitancy information is in fact being promoted by the Russians. So RT, formerly known as Russia Today, a state media outlet, is promoting a number of different claims, amplifying concerns about clotting in the J&J vaccine and some of the stuff in Europe with the AstraZeneca vaccine. So in that case, that's vaccine diplomacy, because what they're doing is looking to promote the Sputnik 5 vaccine. And at the same time, when you shift over to China, they are operating at a different level. So the Russians may be operating a little bit more blatant and brazenly in the stack on, particularly on disinformation, where the Chinese operate at a much more subtle intelligence level that Will's probably more familiar with from his days in the agency. But Chris Wray said it in last week's Worldwide Threats hearing, where they opened, the director of the FBI, they opened a counterintelligence investigation against the Chinese on every 10 hours. And that's not necessarily in Washington, D.C. That is throughout the country at the local level as well. So what are they covering up for? Well, they're continuing to build, push out into the South China Sea. We continue to see what happens with the Uyghurs in the Northwest. And then you've also got continuing to cover up for last year and the origins of the coronavirus. So it is an incredibly complex threat environment right now. And we are unfortunately scrambling to address these real exigent threats from foreign actors, because our own house is in such disarray and we're fighting each other, and it's only going to get worse. I mean, I think we're all watching to see what happens with the Chauvin trial result in Minnesota. And you can bet your bottom dollar that whatever happens there, it is going to be amplified by Russian disinformation actors. Mm-hmm. It is going to be amplified by anyone that wants to cause chaos in the United States. And there are plenty of those that don't have our best interests at heart.
Yeah, I remember from the Mueller report, that was one of the key nuggets that stood out to me, is that race-based divides were things that the Russians often honed in on. It's looking for the cracks, it seems like, in our society to exploit. I'll as the member of the media in the room, so how much of this do you actually put on? I mean, whatever the media means these days, I know what it means at a network where there are editorial standards that we have to live by. But when you are talking about this space, are you just talking about anyone with a blog on social media, or are you talking about cable news? Who are you talking about as sort of feeding into this?
Well, I think that's part of the problem right now, is really scoping the information landscape and the information ecosystem. It's changed so dramatically over the last several years. And it's not just how information is consumed, it's how actors that seek to influence, both for legitimate purposes as well as nefarious purposes, they're shifting around. So let me kind of just encapsulate what's happened over the last couple of years on countering disinformation. So if you think about 2016 in the election and how the Russians used, through the Internet Research Agency, used Twitter accounts and Facebook pages to promote their claims, whatever they were. Through some coordination and collaboration between the intelligence community, the FBI, and the platforms, they were able to connect dots on a lot of the infrastructure that was being used. So, you could say, hey, we know that this account is tied to the Internet Research Agency. You should investigate that for violation of terms and of services. And so the platforms were able to introduce friction into the operations of the Russian actors here. And so they shifted out of St. Petersburg to areas in Africa. Even in one case, they shifted into Mexico and then tried to reach into the US to get domestic producers of content where the NSA can't look at that activity. And then also shifting away onto online journals. And that looks to have a patina of legitimacy, at least. And so what we're seeing is we are countering a lot of this activity, but the adversary is flowing like water to the softer spots or the low points where they can continue to drive their information. And because the demand for conspiracy, because the demand for sensational claims about, for instance, the outcome of the election has such willing recipients here, they're going to continue to have opportunities going forward. So we need to return to some level of trust in authoritative and trustworthy voices.
Yeah, Margaret, if I can pick on that thread for a second. My exposure to disinformation and misinformation was through terrorists trying to influence and radicalize societies. And when I was in the CIA, Al-Qaeda was doing night letters. They were literally writing letters, and this is in the late 90s, early 2000s, writing letters and putting it on people's doorsteps, right? Then you fast forward to ISIS being able to leverage social media to radicalize people. In that process, we knew who they were talking to. They were talking to boys, teenagers, who felt disconnected from their society or from their families, right? And so that narrative, we knew the actors, we knew their tactics or their behaviors, and we knew the content that they were using. And so you can try to counter program or make those folks a little bit more resilient from the content that was being pushed. And when you look at QAnon and some of these current things, what is the people that are, we can identify some of the actors that are pushing this, right? Chris talked about some of the tactics that they're using, even the sophisticated actors. The fact that the FBI has gotten the approvals to take down digital infrastructure in the United States, right? This happened 30 days ago or so. That's pretty significant, and it must be pretty scary what the Russians are trying to do and how they're becoming even more sophisticated with their tactics. But the other thing that we have to figure out is the people that are receiving this content. Why is it resonating with them?
Why?
Right?
Is it the pandemic?
Look, I think cognitive bias is part of it, right? This is this notion that you're seeing a blurring the line between fact and opinion. And then the cognitive bias is that I use my own personal experiences. I weight those more importantly than I do facts that I may get from somewhere else. And then in an information system where the overabundance of opinions, right, are there, and then you're going to listen to people within your own social community and the people that you associate with. So social media has allowed us to connect with everybody, that has a kind of, a similar like to us. Look, traditional media is even having that same problem. Can you determine anymore online the difference between an opinion piece and a basic journalism? What are those standards, right? I don't know what journalistic standards mean and are, and what process people are going through. Is it the same across what we would consider traditional media? If anybody can start a blog,
Right.
Do people know the difference between that? And so I think that question, Margaret, I wish I had a very clear answer, because you asked the exact question that we need to figure out so that we can figure out how to counter this.
I think it comes down to tribalism. I really do think that it's something innate about the human evolution and experience right now. So as clearly divided as we are, even if I'm convinced of this, at least, that even if the president came forward and said, you know what, I was wrong. I was grifting. I lied to everyone. This election was legitimate. President
Donald
Biden,
Trump, you're talking about.
Yeah, Donald Trump. If he came forward and said, I lied to you, Biden's the legitimate president, I'm sorry. You would still see a significant, so there would be a non-zero number, significant, in fact, probably in the tens of millions, that would still say, you know what, he betrayed us. So they're going to go find someone else to lead that tribe. I think it's just human nature. I mean, when we are unified, it tends to be external threats. Look at 9/11. Yes, that's probably the most recent time that we've been unified as a nation, unified against a foreign threat. And look how that ended up. We go to war. So I just think it's part of the human experience and part of the human evolution. And overcoming that is going to be incredibly challenging. Again, even if you could, but it's more cabining up the harms that can be delivered from that. So look at what you talked about, the information ecosystem and what's out there. Look at what's available on YouTube and some of the other streaming platforms where you have non-journalistic programming, but it's really high quality production. Yeah. And you look at it, you're like, this looks like a real news feed. None of the journalistic standards, to your earlier point. And so they can lie. And then what is the remedy for anyone that's impacted, like a Dominion voting systems? Well, they have to sue. And those cases are going to work their way through the court and then have appeals. It's going to be years and years and years. But in the meantime, the harms have been done. The damage to democracy has been done. And that was, that started back in November.
So I interviewed the president of France the other day, and he is publicly calling, as a foreign leader, for regulation of US social media companies and the content. And he brings up the storming of the US Capitol and basically says, Facebook, Twitter, they all want to claim virtue now after the fact by knocking President Trump off of it. He puts responsibility at their door. When we go, Congressman, and look at what's happening with lawmakers on Capitol Hill, they seem to want to regulate, but not really know what they're going to regulate. I mean, how do you solve this? And does it actually come from legislation?
So if we wait for legislation, we may be holding our breath for a long time. But yes, legislation could solve this. And what I think you're going to ultimately see happen is various states are going to be playing a role, and then you're going to see the federal government push, or you're going to see Europe, take steps, and then all the companies will follow because they're operating in Europe. And the example for that is GDPR, which stands for General Data and Privacy Rights, Protection Rights. And so this was a standard that Europe set. And this is what now, when you go to a website and it says this website has cookies, before this was passed, everybody thought this was going to be the downfall of the internet. And then all we did was we really found out that we go to a lot of websites with cookies. And so I think that's another model where I think Europe is probably 15 months to 2 years ahead of us on thinking through the regulatory environment around technology in society.
But doesn't that get called censorship?
It's going to be called censorship. I think some will, but ultimately, I don't see how a platform like some of the social media companies are any different than a news agency or a television station or a newspaper, right? Mm-hmm. And so, just like when the debate around political ads on social media came out, I was saying we should be treating political ads on social media the same way you treat political ads on television and in print media, right? It's the same system. And so how those entities adapt to that, you're going to see some scrutiny of the content that is ultimately being provided. Discussions on how a piece of information becomes viral, right? You know, we know how some of these things. If I said crazier things, my social media footprint would be much bigger than what it is now, right? But guess what? I don't say crazy things, and so why is that? And there's some designs in the algorithm that do that, and I think there's some valid conversations. But we also need elected officials that kind of understand these tools, right? That understand how they work, that understand the business model, so you can have thoughtful conversations around what the role they should be playing.
And you don't just mean for elected leaders to at that congressperson in the tweet when they're saying, don't say this racist thing?
Yeah. You know, it's
you're talking about going further than that.
Yeah, you got to do a little bit more. You got to pop the hood and not just trash talk on those same social media platforms that we're talking about.
We are looking at the upcoming 2022 elections. Chris, how concerned are you about the integrity of our systems?
I think that under an immense amount of stress from a global pandemic, from probably one of the most contentious elections, at least of my lifetime, and I'm younger than Will, but the system held, right? It worked out even under all that stress. I think going to 2022, you're probably going to see, the top of the ticket is empty because it's an off year, it's a midterm. So that said, I think the House looks to be somewhat in place. So you're going to see a lot of contention there, but it's going to be distributed nationally. We're also at the same time going to continue to see the introduction of more paper into the system. And I think that's really the key here. And that was what was such a difference between 16 and 20. So in 2016, it was about 80% of the votes cast in the United States had a paper record associated with them. 80%. In 2020, it was upwards of about 95%. And that's due to a few things. One is that Congress heavily invested with grant funding at the state and local level. But it was also due to a surge in mail-in and absentee ballots. They got entire states off of machines that were just touchscreen with no paper ballot that shifted to mail-in, which is New Jersey, for example. So the paper, though, gives you the ability to go back and count. And so that if there are claims of a dead zombie dictator from Venezuela coming in and using some
just for example, just randomly.
For example, right? In a state like Georgia, right? To come in and do some sort of fractional counting method that would adjust the outcomes, you actually just go back to the paper and say, no, the count is accurate. That's what happened in Georgia. They counted 3 times. The first time they did a manual top of the ticket recount, and then they did a third count after that. And so that paper, again, gives you the ability to go back and do a meaningful audit. So if we can continue to push additional paper, let's get as close to 200 or to 100% as possible. Let's have as much auditing as after the fact as you can to ensure that that outcome is accurate. Those are the steps that we're going to have that are going to be needed to continue to uphold the true integrity of the election system, not the stuff that's being claimed in state capitals, particularly in some of those swing states.
Yeah, and Margaret, on that, this conversation is so fascinating to me because I've been involved in it before CISA was created, and the debates that were going on in Congress about making CISA a thing, right? That was the first step, and then and it was under President Obama and a Republican House where we helped give funding to CISA to help strengthen and harden the voting systems, right? And so I held the first hearing on election interference in the 2016 election before the 2016 election even happened and before CISA was a thing. And we were having these conversations from secretaries of state saying, the federal government shouldn't be involved, and this shouldn't be a strategically important, what's the phrase, Chris?
Critical infrastructure.
Critical infrastructure. And it was like, that means the government's going to take it over. It's like, no, it's not. It means we're going to help y'all defend this. And guess what? We passed all those things, have had 2 of the most secure elections, and one that was super stress tested. So the ability to defend against the vote count, it's only getting better. It's only increasing. The question is going to be on people that want to cry that they lost an election. Oh, and by the way, as someone who's been in tough elections, you have a pretty good idea if, in a precinct, if something squirrely is going on, because you have some historical understanding and perspectives. And look, I can give several examples of where there was a clerical error that we were able to catch because we understood, the trends and the things that were going on there. So there's so many ways to double check and to make sure that elections are safe and secure, that we shouldn't worry about.
And can we just go back to the fact that humans are incapable of keeping secrets? The intelligence community leaks like a sieve. So how is it that at the state and local level, where there are hundreds of thousands of employees that help administer elections, have somehow pulled off the greatest heist and fraud of all time? It's beyond belief that fraud does not happen at a scale, particularly at national elections. Now, are there, rounding error type fraud for dog catchers and county commissioner? Like, yes, that stuff happens, but it's so rare. It gets prosecuted and people go to jail.
But how do you unring that bell? How do you rebuild trust in the system?
Well, first off, elected officials need to stop lying to the American people. Stop grifting, stop fundraising off the big lie. So that's point one. Point
Donald
two,
Trump was the featured speaker at the RNC fundraiser at they came to him at Mar-a-Lago, and he repeated these phrases within the past few days.
I know, hey, welcome to my life last fall, right? I'm on Twitter with rumor control trying to debunk all of these claims that were coming out from Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood and everyone else. And I've got 10,000 followers at the time. He's got 89 million. Like, it's asymmetric. So, but again, it goes back to that point of that's what they want to hear. They don't want to believe that they lost or they were capable of losing. There's so much, fervor for the movement that it's just beyond belief that some dude that's, in his late 80s could possibly beat, or late 70s, whatever, could possibly beat President Trump. I mean, there's, to Will's point earlier, the cognitive dissonance that's out there across the electorate right now is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, look, Margaret, to me, it's pretty simple. Republicans have lost the national election 7 out of the last 8 times. That's going to continue until we do a couple of things. Number one, accept the 2020 election was lost. Donald Trump was incapable of making the Republican Party look like the rest of America. Period, full stop. Number two, we have to stop pandering to these the conspiracy theorists within the party. And then number three, we actually got to be a party based on values, right? And not political expediency. And
you sound like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. And I can name those 2 people because they're 2 people right now.
Sure, but here's yeah, there's others. And Margaret, like the party, yes, there are people that have outsized roles. I'm not questioning that. But the party is made up of people that vote every day. It's made up of people that don't watch Twitter, that are not in their feed all day long. They're not consuming 8 hours of cable news, right? There are normal people out there, and that's why I'm still hopeful, because I engage with those people all the time. And so when we do that, and then we also, Republicans have to accept the fact there are some that believe that the more people vote, those new voters aren't going to vote for us. And when I say us, I mean the Republican Party. That's insane. Guess what? We should have as many people vote as possible. We should making it easier for people to vote. You should be able to vote 24/7 if the local entities are able to do that. And we should be fighting for that vote. If you think that you have to restrict voters, then you need to rethink your policy and your platform, because you're never going to grow.
Chris,
did you want to button that up?
I'm not sure I'm as optimistic as Will. That I think that many parts of today's GOP represents the base, and the base is driving the bus. I've said that before. So you see a lot, particularly in the House, you see a lot of way out there members of the House of Representatives, and I think they're representative of the who put them in office. It's appropriate though that we're sitting here with the McCain Institute, the Sedona Forum. Where are today's John McCains? That's where we are lacking leadership across the top to make good policy and call out bad policy. That's just, I think, the bottom line right now.
So on the policy, on the wonky front, what needs to happen now to fix sort of the underlying infrastructure when you look at external threats like China in particular? What needs to happen from the Biden administration and lawmakers?
Well, my take is that so Russia, I think the best comparison of the two external threats between Russia and China that I've seen is from Rob Joyce, who's now the director of the Cybersecurity Directorate at the National Security Agency. And he said, Russia's the hurricane and China is climate change. And really what we're talking about here is there is that defend today moment with Russia, and then the secure tomorrow moment, and that's with China. So we can deal with China. We can use international cooperation to button them up in Europe and in Crimea and Ukraine. On the China front, it's a very, very, very cold war in the sense that it's going to be soft power. It's about diplomacy. It's about economy. And they're making very strong moves into supplant United States leadership in globally, but also in emerging spaces between South America and Africa. And 5G and the conversation about Huawei is probably the best proxy for this conversation right now. They are flooding the market with with loans up to 120% to help countries that are languishing in 3G or below telecommunications wireless infrastructure, with the promise of 5G. Say, hey, we'll come in, we'll manage the full stack top to bottom. We're going to hook you up with the loans. Don't worry about it. It's all good. And a leader, particularly an authoritarian state, is going to say, are you telling me that I can go to the latest generation of technology and I really don't have to pay for it? I'm going to stay in power for the rest of my life. That's how they're playing their cards. Now, I think the last year has changed the calculus and the perception of China globally, because the way that they were less than transparent about the origins of the coronavirus. So we should seize that opportunity with our partners, with our European partners, with our Asia Pacific partners, and we can take back the initiative. But I'm telling you right now that if we are going to go out there and tell everybody you can't use Huawei, you can't use this, that, or the other, you better have a good replacement to offer them with help deploying it. Well, there are options and they're getting better, but it's going to take investment. And so this is the hardest part. We need to come back around on a country as on industrial policy. Where are we as a leader? What areas are we going to place some bets? And I think telecommunications infrastructure, 5G, has got to be the top of it. Semiconductors, that is what I've seen so far out of the Biden administration, at least on semiconductors. So there is a continuation of the last administration policy. I think there's some lights at the end of the tunnel here in terms of global competition with China.
All right. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for this conversation, and to the McCain Forum, Congressman Hurd, Chris Krebs. Great talking to you.